video server is up. So here we go.
10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In your face, all over the place.
We're online 24/7. 24/7.
You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskymysteries.com.
This is the 2009 Top 10 Webcam in the World winner. This is SETV.
Well, good evening, everybody. Bill Zam here. Welcome to another exciting episode of Surrounded by Idiots. This episode will be found on our YouTube channel and on sunskymysteries.com, where it will be repeating for the next 24 hours on this stream, as well as the audio stream. For our new viewers, my job is to wake people up, to do whatever it takes to do it, to try one person at a time to wake people up to what is actually happening in this country and this world, because we are being burned to the freaking ground by all of these idiots, from Washington to the United Nations to the banks and any other organization or groups of idiots that I have left out. These people are the ones that keep trying to move the Overton window to the left like a dizzy lunatic in a one-man ass-kicking contest. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. It was adopted on December 15th, 1791, along with the rest of the Bill of Rights, and it reads like this: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Our guest tonight is Guy Smith. He is the instigator and author of the book that we're going to be talking about tonight, Shooting the Bull. He is a citizen intellectual of the new American gun culture, to social elites who wish to dictate laws and conditions by which we must live. The citizen intellectual is the most annoying creature on earth. Guy Smith has led an eclectic life. He has been a cowboy and a surfer on the same day. He has also appeared on many television and radio shows, and I have been told with appalling frequency. At any rate, I'd like to bring in Guy Smith to the show. Mr. Smith, how are you doing?
Howdy, Bill. Welcome from San Francisco. I bring you greetings and apologies from here.
That is quite all right. Apology well taken. Let me get the script up on the screen for the folks to see, so that you can read a little bit of the introduction of Guy Smith. I didn't read all of it because I wanted to bring him in. You are a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, are you not?
I am. That was fairly a recent step up. I knew that I had ancestors who shot redcoats for fun and profit way back when, and finally did enough rooting around to certify a few of them and get my chops in SAR.
Excellent. Excellent. And on behalf of the entire audience and to all your ancestors and yourself, thank you for your service to the country. Your book, Shooting the Bull, what was the genesis for that? Oh, by the way, I forgot to add, strap in, Tiger, you're in for a bumpy ride.
Well, here's the genesis. Starting about 12 years ago, I started publishing another book called Gun Facts. It's been in continuous publication for 12 years. It's been downloaded and read in 162 countries around the world, most frequently in Washington, D.C. and other liberty-deprived areas. It's even been downloaded into communist China, Cuba, places like that. And the whole purpose of that book was to debunk gun control mythology coming out of the Brady campaign, the Violence Policy Center, Barack Obama's old Joyce Foundation, other criminal enterprises like these. And over a 12-year span of finding these people, catching them in lies, seeing them telling the same lies for a decade, it occurred to me that I had all the raw material I needed to write a book on propaganda analysis. And that's what Shooting the Bull is. It's a Billy laugh to begin with, but it is an end-to-end tour of not only what the gun control industry has tried to do by lying to the American public, but also how they did it and why it tended to work for a while. So when you finish reading this book, not only do you come away knowing that gun control mythology is pure hokum, but you also have this very disquieting feeling in your stomach because now you can spot political lies in real time, and you begin to remember all those times that people did try to BS you on other political issues. My whole purpose was to raise everyone's BS detectors, make them a little bit smarter, make sure that they know when they're being hoodwinked.
This is very true. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been reading this book. It is a knee-slapping, rollicking, good-time book. I laughed my butt off when I was reading this thing. I said, this is great. This is like reading Mark Twain.
Well, that's high praise. I'm not sure Mr. Clemens would agree with that, but, we'll resurrect him, see what he has to say.
Well, it is quite funny. Now, the people that are on the video side of the stream are seeing one of the comments that I wrote over the weekend. And as we get into the book, I wanted to ask you if you think, if you agree with this or not. You're much more involved in the culture and in the politics on a national level than I am. And here is my observation. I believe that we are seeing a planned increase in violence. How they convince the victims to stand in front of a piece of lead will leave for the conspiracy buffs, but I am convinced that we are seeing a planned attack on the Second Amendment.
Well, there's no doubt that there's going to be an attack on the Second Amendment. The other side never gives up. Whether they're actually trying to instigate violence or not, I couldn't say that for sure. But here's one thing that I do know about the maturations of culture, the way that free people tend to think, and the way that autocrats also tend to think. And that's that the autocrats are always going to drive towards complete control. Eventually, you push people, free people, back far enough into a corner, somebody is going to stand their ground. So as long as people in Washington, D.C. or the United Nations continue to say, no, we're going to keep taking freedom away from you, eventually some people who find freedom very precious are going to retaliate. And, that's part of what I do. That's part of my passion is that I kind of see these inevitabilities down the road, and I'm working like hell to try to keep them from happening.
And how do you do that? What activities are you involved in that are proactive against this?
The primary thing is I'm trying to get people to agree that freedom is the common denominator throughout this country. I live out here in San Francisco, and for a Southern-born libertarian out here, this becomes an interesting dialogue between me and the surrounding gentry. The one thing I've been able to do is to make it very clear to people, both locally but also internationally in my writings, is that the moment that you agree to give up your neighbor's freedom, the moment that you do not want them to do something that's non-destructive simply because you don't like it, you open up the gateway to your own freedoms being restricted. There's a large gay population out here in San Francisco. A significant number of them used to be anti-gun. Two things happened to kind of switch that around in recent years. One was me communicating to these people and saying, okay, well, if you want to take away my right to own a gun, I don't have to give a damn about your rights to do what you want to in the privacy of your own home. And I don't have to give a damn about your desire to marry your boyfriend. That put it in their terms. The other thing that happened, though, most interestingly, was the rise of the Pink Pistols, which is a very, very rabid pro-gun gay group, whose logo, quite amusingly, is a pink triangle with a 45 ACP coming out of it, and a caption that reads, "Bash this." Once you get people to agree that we all need to be free, then a lot of the other discussion goes away, and the people who are the autocrats can no longer pull or divide us and then pull the other camp against us.
Interesting. I find that fascinating that you're able to get a productive soapbox in San Francisco.
You know, people out here come from a different cultural bias,
Mm-hmm.
and the moment that you discuss something besides the difference between the cultural biases, then you can get them to listen. You may not always get them to agree, but you at least get past the anger point. You get past this nonsensical shouting at one another. The folks out here tend to come from the bias of government is benign, government should help people, et cetera, et cetera. When you get them to the point and you demonstrate that government has indeed ruined people's lives, corrupted the system, and made things bad for a lot of folks over the years, then you can at least get them to the point of questioning whether a certain government power should or should not exist or should not be expanded.
I find that remarkable that that we're able to actually do that. I frequently come up against people on the other side of the fence that they got a closed mind. And here in Michigan, we got a ton of these left-wing liberals here. And it's just hard as anything to talk to them.
Well, a lot of it is fear. And people who have a suspicion or a fear cannot overcome that. Let me tell you my two favorite war stories out here. In Alameda County, there happens to be an NRA chapter, and surprise, I know a few people in it. And I have instigated those people into doing some rather unusual things over the years. The little city of Alameda, which is actually an island in San Francisco Bay, is not what anyone would consider a conservative bastion. But they also happen to have the longest annual 4th of July parade in the nation.
Wow.
20 or 30,000 people come out just to watch. It's over 3 miles long and typically over 200 entries every year. So I talked the local NRA Members Council one year into entering into the event. And the reason I knew they could get away with this was that it's partially sponsored by the mayor of the city of Alameda, and thus, as long as you have all your clothing on and you're not recklessly endangering people, they have to let you into the parade. So the first year I marched with them, just to accept any incoming tomatoes, since I, was the clown who started all this. And I was surprised. We had a 30-to-1 favorable response rate from the crowd. And people were jumping up and saying, "Thank God you're here." They would run out into the middle of the parade route to shake our hands. The silent majority, who for all this time had felt like they weren't accepted in the San Francisco Bay Area community, were now willing to stand up and basically out themselves in front of their neighbors, in front of the people that they would babysit for, in front of their bosses and their coworkers who happened to be there. That broke down the fear. It got to the point where a couple of years later, two things happened. The Coast Guard, we happen to be a Coast Guard town in Alameda, they used to bring a boat every year to this parade, a patrol boat, and on the bow of this boat was a mounting bracket for a BFG, a big freaking gun. And the mounting bracket was empty. The ROTC cadets used to march without anything, not even little wooden drill sticks. 2 years later, the Coast Guard had put this Browning 50 caliber on top, and for decorative purposes had thrown a live belt of ammo over the top, and the ROTC guys were marching with M1 Garands over their shoulders. So
I find that to be amazing.
we broke down the fear, and the moment that the fear was broken, people were willing to accept just nominal displays of what the organizations were about. So that's step number one, break down the fear. Step number two, get back to the issue. And one of the funny things about politics is that people keep diverting the core of the subject. And the moment that you bring people back and talk about the fundamentals, they're forced to talk on your terms.
And that would be probably where your book, Gun Facts, comes in. For the people that don't know, the name of the website is gunfacts.info, and everybody on the video side can see the website now. While you were talking about those parades in Alameda, I actually had chills that the silent majority out there woke up. I'm thrilled to hear that.
They did, and it's had all sorts of amusing effects. About 3 years into it, the NRA chapter got put behind the Alameda Small Dog Society. And the folks from the NRA, they're polite, happy people. They went over and talked to the small dog people. The small dogs came over and talked to them. And then, as a joke, the small dog people came up with a little sign and put it on their trailer, which was the end of their entry, and said, "Please don't shoot our dogs." But nobody took offense. We understood that was a good-natured joke between neighbors. And that got into the newspaper, and nobody took offense by it. There were no nasty letters to the editor, and the NRA is still in that parade every year.
Now, what about the anti-gun crowd? Do you get any blowback from them on this?
No, the anti-gun crowd out here has had to revert to their original plans. Long ago, they started romancing city governments to have very, very specific laws passed in very specific towns.
Mm-hmm.
Out here in San Francisco, there's an organization called the Legal Community Against Violence. And basically, it's a pack of shysters over in San Francisco. I'm sorry, shysters. I shouldn't use the nasty words. Cretins and fools who happen to have JDs. And their entire mission in life, and they get money from Barack Obama's Joyce Foundation to do so, is to draft laws, get them passed on the local level, see what survives and can be brought up to either the state or the national level. So the anti-gun crowds out here are no longer visible. They're no longer actively jumping up and down in front of people on street corners. But they are romancing anti-gun politicians and trying to get very narrow, specific laws passed. In the city of Oakland, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, you cannot find a gun store. They have all been taxed out of existence. You cannot find, if there was one, you couldn't find bullets on display there. You would have to ask for them from the guy behind the counter as if they were some piece of pornography that you were hiding in the back room. A lot of ridiculous laws like that. But the good news is that they are only getting these passed in very narrow places, and heroes like Alan Gottlieb at the Second Amendment Foundation instantly file lawsuits, and almost all of these bad laws get overturned.
But they keep right on trying to pass them in other towns, don't they?
Yeah, well, they'll never stop. The gun control industry existed basically going back to the end of the Civil War. Up until the 1960s, they were mainly concerned with disarming minorities.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow in the 60s, after the JFK assassination and the Robert Kennedy assassination and Martin Luther King, they realized that they had an opening to try to disarm everybody. So they're never going to stop. It's ideology. It's their end goal.
In your book, Shooting the Bull, one of the first chapters, and it's up on the screen for the viewers to see, I found highly amusing about Dianne Feinstein and her raking an AK-47 over the reporters.
Well, for your listeners, here's what happened. Dianne Feinstein's 1994 assault weapons ban was getting ready to expire. It had a 10-year sunsetting period. She was campaigning like mad to try to get it renewed. And so she called together a bunch of reporters into her room, and during this she hoisted up an AK-47 to her hip, and she put her finger on the trigger. Let me repeat that. She put her finger on the trigger and moved the gun around in such a way that the muzzle was sweeping across at least a handful of reporters, which I'm sure caused them to need to go change their BVDs later on that day. And this is, in my mind, probably scripted. It was probably intentional. And any of your guests, if you go to Google and you say Dianne Feinstein finger trigger, you'll see the photographic evidence. You cannot instill fear in people unless they feel it. If you have to use a reporter to instill fear in the populace, you almost have to scare the reporter. I think that was part of what Di-Fi was doing that day. She wanted a certain amount of terror so that journalists, well, I can't call them journalists, we'll call them hacks that work for news organizations, would go forth and in turn try to scare the public. It didn't work, thankfully. It sunsetted. Nobody takes her assault weapons ban seriously. But it was a monumental moment in political theater and one that had a distinct purpose. The lie of fear, which is the primary form of propaganda in politics, is essential to most of the gun control industry's efforts. You can't get people to give up tools of self-defense unless you scare them or their neighbors witless.
Speaking of lies, in your book, Shooting the Bull, you have an entire list of lies, and I would submit these are not only the lies that they use in the gun control industry, but also for any political purpose that they see fit, from abortion to Agenda 21 to just about anything they want to use it for. Where did you come up with with these lies? Did you come up with these yourself?
Those are all original. The working title for them are The Catalog of Canards, which was the original working title for Shooting the Bull, but a dozen people told me, that's too highfalutin. You need something more addressable. But these were the individual forms of propaganda that I identified as I was writing the book and as I was researching the gun control industry. And they are a working dialogue, a lingua franca, if you will, for the way that political propaganda are created and then spread. And these are the things I want people to recognize. These are the words that I want them to repeat when they're getting into conversations with their neighbor, if they're on an online forum, discussing politics, et cetera, et cetera. If you see somebody throwing some bunkum out there, then by all means, look it up and call it the lie of fear, the lie of Lewinsky, the lie of looming catastrophe. This is your tool for putting people in their place very rapidly. If you can demonstrate to somebody that, yes, you have told a lie, I know what the lie is, I have a name for your lie, and I'm not going to let you tell it anymore, eventually they'll quit trying.
And one thing that I noticed, speaking of lies, is I noticed this back in my 20s when Ronald Reagan was president, and we didn't have cable TV back then. We had, I believe, we had just invented the wheel, and it was right after we invented fire. And Al Gore and I were still working on the concept of the internet at the time. But I noticed that with these progressives, these liberals, the left-wingers, they go by the theory that if you tell the lie often enough, it magically becomes the truth. How do we combat that?
Well, the good news is that the tools to combat that are already in place. My friend Brian Patrick, he wrote the academic forward for my book, and please don't let the phrase academic forward scare you. Brian is a good old boy. He lives up in Ohio. He's a tenured professor of communications at Toledo University. And he paid me a high compliment by calling me a pioneer of the citizens' media. What has happened is that in a very short span of history, we have gone from a very top-down information and communication culture to a network communication culture. Back when you and I were kids, back in the Taft administration, what would happen was we had 3 network news channels, and if you were really, really lucky, you lived in a big town that had 2 newspapers, but typically you only had 1. And all of these different journalistic centers were very incestuous. They all came from the same colleges. They all tried to job hop in between. So they all had one mindset. And oddly enough, it was a little bit left of center. Well, no, it wasn't a little bit left of center. It was a lot of left of center, which for a country that's been measured to be a little bit right of center, I found unusual. What happened first was FM radio. When FM radio was created and the spectrum was allocated, all the music channels fled to FM, which left a lot of real cheap airtime on AM radio. And people who used to not have a voice, people right of center, libertarians, free thinkers, didn't matter, they set up talk radio, because AM's perfectly suited for that. And this broke the duality, or the monolithic news structure. You no longer got your daily perspective of the world from New York City, from ABC, CBS, and the NBC. You got it from at least 2 or 3 different voices. After that, when the Internet became commercialized, anyone who had $12.95 a month could become a publisher. And now you had 1 billion voices out there. And at that point, the genie was out of the bottle. If you take a little bit of time to study your issue, to understand who needs to hear what you have to say and how to reach them, then you can change the course of modern American politics. This is going to sound like bragging. I don't want it to, but being in marketing in Silicon Valley, I know how to measure things on the Internet. So one of the things I've done over the last 12 years of publishing Gun Facts is I keep little automated tracking systems to see how it's being used. And Gun Facts has been integral in changing the nature of the debate about gun politics. The whole purpose of the book was to give you, me, and anyone else out there 100 pages of detailed facts that refute everything that the gun control industry has been telling people, so that you can copy and paste it at will. Copyright allows you to do that, and use it when you're writing letters to the editor. Use it when you're arguing with your wife. Use it when you're berating your congressman. Use it when you're in an online chat room. And by watching how people have used it and how frequently they used it, I have seen the other side be slowly beaten into a point where all they have left are their sound bites, and nobody believes their sound bites anymore.
So the only thing they have left to do is essentially getting into power, which they have done, and completely ignoring the Constitution.
That's about the only tool they have left. And on that note, this is what we need to be fearful of in this election cycle. Barack Obama has never been pro-gun. He's never been gun neutral. If you look at his voting record, if you look at the 8 years that he was on the board of directors of the Joyce Foundation, which is the bank for the gun control industry in this country, if you look at anything that he said about guns before running for president, he is even more anti-gun than Bill Clinton was, if that's even imaginable. He knows better than to squander his political capital on unpopular issues in the first term of office. So he has a need to hold back till the second term. The 2 things that he can do in his second term, which could eliminate gun rights in this country, are to appoint more anti-gun Supreme Court and federal judges, which he's already begun the process. His 2 first Supreme Court nominees are not pro-gun at all. The second thing that he can do is sign and try to move through the Senate treaties that, according to some law scholars, would allow for the regulation of guns inside of the country via treaty law. Now, there's a lot of honest debate between constitutional scholars whether that's possible or not. But he's already backed the Latin American gun control treaty, and Hillary Clinton is actively working on and admits publicly to working on the gun control treaty in the United Nations. So if Barack Obama is reelected, you're going to see, first, treaties enacted to try to create gun control via treaty clauses, and then a Supreme Court who will certify and back that. So I want everyone to understand that the United Nations may become your lord and master over your guns 4 years from now.
Yes, I have an article about it up on the screen for the viewers. It's called informally called the Small Arms Treaty. And it would in fact circumvent the Second Amendment, as well as, I believe, go hand in hand with their Agenda 21 agenda, if you will, with what they are doing with seizing lands and whatnot with that. I take it that this particular regime, this president, the guy that I like to call the dear leader, I assume that he is, we would consider him a globalist.
Oh, without a doubt, a globalist. And I think it's reflected not only in what he does, but what the people he surrounds himself with, what they agree with, and what they say. It's demonstrated in small ways, such as him bowing to dictators in other countries. It's practiced in large ways in what his staff inside the Justice Department and the Solicitor General office believe about treaty law and whether a treaty can overrule an element in the Bill of Rights. So yeah, he's very much of the mindset that America should be part of a global community with some sort of authoritarian rule even above the United States Constitution. And for people like me who had ancestors who, killed and came damn close to dying in order to create a country where we were not subservient and we were free, this is completely out of character with anything that we would call Americanism.
And to be clear with the audience, this is, in fact, what these people in the current administration are trying to do, and it is, in fact, what people jokingly call the New World Order, what they call a conspiracy, which it is not. It is real, and it is what they are doing. A lot of Obama's czars are specifically anti-gun people. They don't like guns. They want to take them out of the hands of the average citizens.
They want to do that, and the funny thing is that among the legions of the anti-gun crowds, there are a swath of useful idiots. There are people who just knee-jerk inherently, at a gut level, think that guns are evil, or they don't like guns, or they've been traumatized in some way, shape, or form, and they perceive a lack of guns as a peaceful society. There are others who believe that citizens should be subservient and that it's tough to make people subservient if they can tell, whatever petty bureaucrat, to get the hell off of my property and be able to enforce it. So the two go hand in hand, and I'm not sure whether they are conspiratorially linked, but they at least have mutual end goals.
One of the people that I find troubling, because I am knowledgeable about his past, and I believe you are too by looking at your blog, Cowboy Confessional, Guy Smith, songwriter, writer, and political provocateur. It's guysmith.org/blog. Is our friend, in orderly decline of the U.S. dollar is desirable, George Soros.
or King George, as I like to call him. Yeah, man, a more interesting character is hard to find on the political stage. I mean, for people not familiar with George Soros, keep in mind that back in the 2004 election, whether you like George Bush or not, didn't matter. He said that he would be willing to blow his entire $22 billion wealth to get George Bush unelected. So here's a guy who was born in Hungary, who basically got rich by almost collapsing the UK economy during some currency trading escapades, who then comes to our country and basically says he would throw an election if he thought that he could succeed in doing it. Now, here's a guy who's just dangerous on many, many levels, and you get one guess as to who he would be backing in this next election. The good news is that he was convicted overseas of insider trading. He has gone through all but his last appeal, and the vote on the last appeal was not in his favor. He's got one more chance to go. Odds are he's going to be convicted, and if he can be extradited, he will go to prison. This all is wonderful. The problem is who's going to be in the White House controlling the extradition process, or who's going to give him a pardon. So we can hope that this last appeal is not actually summarized until February of next year, and that there'll be somebody else in the White House who go, Soros, of course we're going to extradite him.
I would probably imagine that some of those judges are going to have sudden heart attacks or tragic one-car accidents in their garage.
You never know. It's a spooky world out there.
Oh, yes, it is. It is so spooky. I just don't trust the guy. I don't, knowing his past and how he grew up, I just don't trust him. And what can you say about George Soros? The guy, I think the guy's just evil. Just plain evil. Horns coming out of his head evil.
He is, and I'll tell you somebody who I'm now developing deep-seated suspicions about, and that's our friend Warren Buffett.
Yes.
Reason Magazine, not this month, but the month before, had an excellent article where they set up a chronology of Warren's activism with inside of Washington, D.C. against when he placed his investments. To give a brief recap, when we hit the recession of 2008, he realized that bank stocks had suffered greatly, but that they weren't going to rebound very quickly. But he went in and bought up a bunch of bank stocks, then went immediately to Washington and campaigned for billions of your tax dollars to be given to the banks, which he had just bought a bunch of stock in. There were several other collateral pieces out there which explain how he profited not only from TARP but from some other bailout processes as well. When he saw Barack Obama getting elected, he suddenly started buying up a lot more railroads because he knew that Barack Obama didn't like cars, didn't like highways, but did like high-speed rail. And he's busy in Washington trying to get more and more tax dollars funneled to those things. So Warren, he can take his, good old Omaha boy persona and just put it in the dumpster right now, because he is arguably one of the top game masters in Washington, D.C., and one of the top theft artists in a city that's basically known for theft.
Speaking of theft, this goes hand in hand with what we are talking about. One of our local radio stations is extremely conservative, and one of their Sunday hosts, I think he's actually a surgeon at the University of Michigan. He's a doctor in Ann Arbor at any rate. Back when the bailout was happening, the stimulus, George Soros was one of the people that was advising Obama behind the scenes and how to distribute that money. And oddly enough, Soros went on a stock buying spree of the companies that he advised should get the bailout, and guess what happened?
They got the bailout.
They got the bailout, and he made a ton of money.
You know, there's always been crony capitalism, and I'm sure if we go back through history, we can find people in the Democrat, the Republican, the Whig Party, the Bull Moose Party, who have all dabbled in it from time to time. Here's my concern. Back in the 1930s, 1940s, there were a couple of key Supreme Court decisions that rewrote the original meaning of the Commerce Clause. This granted to Congress the power to do just about anything. It devolved us from being a constitutional republic into a mere democracy. In this, you now had not only the Congress's power to do almost anything, you had Congress's power to get into almost any level of mischief and at any level of spending. When this happens, thieves come out of the woodwork. People go specifically to figure out how they can profit quickly off of the largesse of the government, or just out of straight-out theft, or out of just trying to steer money into certain government spending projects whereby you can profit collaterally. This has now gotten to the ridiculous point. When I saw Hank Paulson being given the authority to take $700 billion and give it to banks based on a one-sheet of paper declaration of need from the banks, then I knew that the entire checks and balances system in our government had failed, that any constitutional relevancy had failed, and that, in effect, we don't really have a country anymore. We're kind of limping along like a zombie. We really still want to believe that the United States of America has a constitution that's enforced and defended and believed in by the people in power, but I think they really have gamed it to the point of non-existence.
I have to agree, and I will bring up at this point an article that I believe appeared on WorldNet Daily. It was either last week or the week before, and it was written by another libertarian, Judge Andrew Napolitano, one of the people that were fired from Fox News before they began their apparent left shift a few months ago. And the title of this article is "What If the Government Never Took the Constitution Seriously?" And the first paragraph reads like this: "What if the same generation, in most cases the same human beings, that wrote the First Amendment, 'Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech,' also enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, which make it a crime to criticize the government?" Which brings us to the discussion of the executive order that Obama updated a couple of weeks ago that essentially allows the government to declare martial law without declaring martial law.
It is a frightening turn of events, and even before that, when he was given by our Congress the power to basically assassinate American citizens who may or may not, by his judgment, be involved in terrorist activities. Let's take an extreme, kind of absurd example, but let's just say that because earlier tonight I have said I really doubt whether the United States of America legally exists anymore. Mm-hmm. Is that a terrorist statement? Probably not to you or me. Could somebody in the Justice Department say, oh, well, he's trying to rabble-rouse and he's trying to cause sedition, and because of that it's aiding and abetting terrorist notions, and we have to now go kill Guy Smith? It's an absurd extreme, but it's now gotten to the point where the government actually technically has the permission, well, I won't say permission, has the power to do so. So we live in increasingly frightening times, and that a Republican Congress would write that bill and then send it out to this president makes me wonder sometimes how far afield the Republicans have gone, how much of their soul has been franchised. Saw a talk recently by one of the founders of the Tea Party Patriot Movement, And he told an interesting story. He talked about when they went to go visit John Bonner for the first time. And they walked in, sat down, there was some pleasant chit-chat, and Bonner said, what do you want? And it was an obvious plea, like, what is our horse trading today? What do I need to give you, and what are you going to give to me? And I think when politics has gotten to that point where your first assumption is that deals need to be made, then we're not even in governance anymore. We're just in who's going to profit and how are they going to profit, whether it's political or financial.
So essentially, we're no longer being represented.
No, we're not even really a representative democracy, much less a constitutional republic. There are some signs of hope out there. The fact that Ron Paul has reawakened the libertarian faction inside the Republican Party is kind of nice. The fact that we're getting liberals and conservatives to agree that freedom is the quintessential element of our country, and the moment we abandon that, then we're sunk. And the fact that the thieves are now so bold and doing it so openly that you can have severe disgust from the Tea Party to the Occupy Wall Street people, folks who normally have no common ground, but they both hate the fact that banks got bailouts. There are glimmers of hope out there. It's not lost yet.
Well, hopefully everybody can come together and realize that, number one, we're all Americans, and number two, returning to the rule of law, the Constitution, it's a necessity. Otherwise, we're just going to become a third world dictatorship. And we're halfway there now with this clown.
Well, the problem is the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court did its job, and you can go back through history and read, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances where they failed to do their job. Mm-hmm. If they did, none of this would be an issue. We would still have a Congress that had a finite and enumerated list of powers. We would have all civil rights protected as opposed to those that are just picked and chosen by elected officials. All the things that we as a society argue and bitch about right now, we would quit arguing about because the original intent of the Constitution would be upheld. One of the things that I would love to see, and I know it will probably never happen, but Article 3, Section 1 is very clear that you can impeach a Supreme Court justice. And I would love to see the day when one or another party had enough of a majority in both of the houses that they could go back and find 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices who are still sitting, whose rulings are so out of character with individual liberty that they just go ahead and remove them from the bench. Probably never going to happen, but man, that's a wonderful victory.
That, actually, I've got Article 3 up here right now on the screen for people to read as we are discussing that. I would imagine that if anybody attempted to impeach a sitting Supreme Court judge, that would throw this country into a crisis like we've never seen before. And at what point do we say we have to do it? And number one, who is going to do it? Number two, who is going to have the guts to do it? And number three, why would they do it?
Well, why they would do it would require somebody in office and people in Congress of enough constitutional spine that they insist. Mm-hmm. They have to be able to make the case. They have to put forth an argument that what certain Supreme Court justices did was wrong, and that on its own ground would be enough. Not so many years ago, we had the infamous Keogh decision where the Supreme Court basically eliminated property rights in this country. Now, I don't care who you are. You have to think like a pretzel, or you have to be highly intoxicated to read the takings clause and to read the term for public use and interpret that as meaning that any government agency can take your property for whatever reasons they think are appropriate. That was the time to start impeaching justices. It's sad that didn't happen. Numerically, it couldn't have because of how evenly divided the Republicans and Democrats are.
Mm-hmm.
But the outrage from coast to coast in this country was such that if there was ever a time in my lifetime that could have happened, that's when it would have happened.
And now we, of course, several years later, have the, what do they call it, the Rural Sustainability Council. And, 90% of Nevada now belongs to the federal government. And all of it flows right back to the, what we call the Agenda 21 in the United Nations, which is the sustainability of the planet.
Isn't it interesting that the federal government has 90% Nevada and we still can't put our nuclear waste in Yucca Mountain? Once again, that's where political gamesmanship comes in. It doesn't matter what was right. It doesn't matter the scientific research on Yucca Mountain. It doesn't matter that we still have a really big problem with nuclear waste in this country because Harry Reid was president of the Senate, and because Barack Obama was elected, it immediately got shut down.
So now we have all this nuclear waste just rolling around in railway cars all over the country with nowhere to put it because somebody's playing political games with our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sadly it'll probably take some sort of terrorist creating a dirty bomb out of nuclear waste for somebody to finally say, well, Harry, we don't care what you think. We're putting it in your mouth.
Yeah, that is quite disturbing, given the issues that the Japanese are having with their nuclear power plant over there in Fukushima. It would seem that people would get together, even if they're anti-nuclear power, which in my opinion is fine. It's your opinion, but we got to do something with the waste that we have before something happens. And how can we convince the people in Washington to do that? What the average person, and a lot of people would think this is not an important issue, but given everything that's happening geologically around the planet with all of there's been a tremendous rise in earthquakes and whatnot, and we need to start thinking proactively rather than reactively. What can the average citizen do? What can the people listening to the show do tomorrow when they get up to help move this along?
Well, the only thing that's going to help move it along is to remove the obstacles. And right now the obstacles come in two flavors, Barack Obama and Harry Reid. Barack Obama is solvable in November. Harry Reid is not solvable. He recently won re-election. He's going to be there for a while. However, this is a federal issue. It's being done on federal land. It definitely falls within even the narrowest definitions of interstate commerce and national security. So we have to elect a president who isn't just going to kowtow to some politician for one reason or another, is going to look at what is, if I remember correctly, were nearly 2 decades of studies about the geological realities of Yucca Mountain. And we'll go ahead and green light getting the stuff moved there. I mean, the facility was built. It was ready. And for it to go into mothballs at a time when we really need to be securing all this nuclear waste was criminally insane. Criminally insane, Barack Obama. I'm being redundant now.
Yes. Oxymoron. We're going to do the oxymoron thing now. And that just that just flummoxes me because it's such a dangerous situation. They're actually playing political games with people's lives.
Well, and that's the funny thing. Government's first job, always first job, is to protect people's rights. Second job is to protect people from the intentional or negligent harm by others. Now, we've got a situation here where we have a lot of nuclear waste piling up in various locations around the country. Some of it's poorly guarded, some of it's rusting in 55-gallon drums. It's not a safe and sound situation. And because the federal government took the authority for management of nuclear waste and is now not doing anything to manage the nuclear waste, they are failing on their second job. They are creating a situation where there will be negligent harm caused one way or another. Anytime the government fails on those first two duties, the government is just a failure in general.
Well, let me ask you a proposition. As a theory, could it be that there is an element that is allowing this to happen under the hope that something would go wrong, where a terrorist group would steal a bunch of this stuff, somebody would use it as a dirty bomb or whatnot, in the same way that they allow the southern border to be porous in order to enact more controls over the population, like the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security? Do you think they might be doing this on purpose?
Generally I don't believe those things, and the reason is anytime that it requires 3 or more people to keep a lid on a covert project, it usually quits being covert. I mean, information flow is just too easy. Take Fast and Furious. This was, quite arguably, a criminal enterprise orchestrated by the Department of Justice, and it took one guy who works in the BATF to go to one blogger and blow the lid off of the whole case. So is it possible? Yeah. Is it probable? Probably not. However, one thing I have seen in politics, and it works very reliably, is to let a problem exist or to let a problem go unchecked in order to use it for political advantage. And that doesn't require actively doing anything. It just simply requires being quiet long enough until it blows up in some way that you can make it useful to yourself. Let's take the border thing, for example. Any of the presidents over the last 30, 40 years could have secured the border. It's not that big of a technical problem. It's not that big of an engineering problem. But there are a lot of people who don't want the border secured, not for creating some sort of crisis situation, but because the farmers need cheap labor to pick the crops, because certain voting blocks need to be secured for the next election, etc. A lot of people in Washington, D.C. are willing to stay silent on the subject because there's some mechanical advantage to them.
That, yeah, I can see that. Or what they call comprehensive immigration reform.
Right, which, that I'm glad you kind of brought that up. That's been one of my pet things for a while. I keep hearing people saying we need comprehensive reform on this, that, or the other thing. I have come to believe that anytime you hear a member of one party or another saying, well, we need a comprehensive plan, they say that in order to prevent anything from happening. The possibility of getting the Democrats and the Republicans and the independents to all agree on a plan that solves all the problems around one particular issue is something less than zero. And by insisting on that, you have a very good public soundbite and one that immediately stops any progress to actually addressing the problem. Comprehensive immigration reform, we don't need it. The laws exist that define who is allowed in this country. You can enforce those laws, and in the meantime, completely asynchronously, go ahead and start moving forward whatever legislation you think might be appropriate for modifying our immigration laws. But we don't all have to sit down at a table and work out every last little detail to begin resolving the problem.
The laws already exist. They don't really need to be reformed. But then again, these people are looking at the illegal aliens that are pouring across the border as a convenient source of votes.
The Hispanic population in America has grown so large that politicians are now at least fearful of offending anyone in that community. And I think because of that, they walk very gingerly around the immigration issue. But quite frankly, let's just go ahead and drop it down to its lowest possible level. Does somebody who knowingly violates the laws of this country by illegally entering this country, do they fit our American stereotype of law-abiding citizens? Are they the kind of people we want as neighbors because we assume a certain amount of societal conformity to at least trying to obey the laws? That's the bottom line right there. And I don't really care who I offend by that statement. If you come into this country illegally and you knew that you were breaking the law when you did that, anything short of, fearing for your life makes it inappropriate and means that you do not understand the American way of living and the American way of thinking when it comes to a polite and well-organized society. And you have no expectation of being allowed to stay here.
Well, we're seeing the degradation of polite society with the Occupy Wall Street movement, the extremely proactive antisocial behavior that we see all over the place now. And do you think we've gone down to the point as a society where the illegal immigration issue will be acceptable to the majority of Americans?
I don't think it's acceptable to the majority of Americans. The polls that I've seen on the subject indicate that Americans are upset at their government for not doing the minimum, the modicum of control of the borders to try to regulate who is or is not entering the country. So I don't think that's an issue. But let me make one observation. Mm-hmm. When it comes to politics, we've never really been a polite society. We have always argued and cussed and fought and slandered and libeled people. If you look back to poor old Jefferson when he was first running for president, they called him everything but Homo sapien. I mean, it was a vicious, vicious campaign. Where we tend to be impolite when it comes to politics is when the government starts bending the rules. Doesn't matter, if it's people violating treaties with the Indians, whether it's the Supreme Court declaring that Dred Scott was still going to be a slave, or if it's future Supreme Court saying that Barack Obama's UN gun control treaty means that somebody's going to kick down your door next week and take all your firearms. Anytime the government doesn't obey the rules is when we as a people really start yelling and screaming the loudest. And that gets back to what we said earlier. Ever since the 1940s, we have to scream about everything because they broke our Constitution by redefining the Commerce Clause and making any type of mischief possible by Congress.
Yeah, if you could go back in time, that would be the one thing you'd want to go back and change. I have to agree with you there. That decision on the Commerce Clause, I think that is essentially how they were able to come up with their health care scheme that now the Supreme Court has to decide once again. Why does it seem lately all of the important decisions in our society come down to the Supreme Court deciding that? Have we gotten that weak?
It's not that we've gotten that weak, but when the Supreme Court allowed Congress to meddle in anything, then everything suddenly became a function of government. And the moment suddenly everything became a possible function of government, then the Supreme Court had to make decisions about everything. And there is the great and critical flaw, and this was brought up in 2008, keeping Barack Obama out of office to try and ensure that more strict constitutionalists sat on the Supreme Court was essential, and we as a nation failed. We let somebody into office who was going to put people on the court who were going to keep it in a moving towards a statist society. And until we reverse that mistake, until we as a people say that constitutional fidelity is more important than anything else, and that's going to be our first criteria for picking a president or a senator, then we're going to continue muddling along and fighting every issue.
Yeah. We've just about reached the end of the show, but I wanted to finish up with one of my absolute favorite topics that I think is a ton of fun, and it comes from your book, and that is your opinion on a fellow Michigan resident that I like to call the Fat Boy. And to make it very clear, let me get back on camera right now. Hey, Mike, up there in Traverse City, I don't know if any of your friends or anybody happen to watch Surrounded by Idiots, but if you could make a quick phone call and tell Michael Moore, when he picks up the phone, just tell him, hey, Fat Boy, they're talking about you on the TV. And that tells you about how I like Michael Moore, a true waste of flesh.
Oh boy, and he's been wasting a lot of it. Michael is interesting to me in as much as he has made a career out of being a propagandist.
And he's good, and he's a good movie maker too. That's the thing. He's so good at it.
Well, he certainly has an artistic style, and that aw shucks, good old boy type of persona, which he has somehow stitched together over the years, helps him sell that. But he has been caught so many times not only falsifying information, creating out-of-context scenarios that do not exist in real life, hoodwinking people, and then saying the most absurd things like how it was inappropriate that we killed Osama bin Laden. He has now sunk to the point where I don't think anyone outside of MSNBC bothers to listen to him anymore, and quite frankly, I think the people at MSNBC are beginning to have their doubts.
Tell me about his involvement in the Million Mom March. He just essentially showed up and just started throwing his weight around, didn't he?
Jeez, between him and Rosie O'Donnell, that's a lot of weight to be throwing around.
And a lot of little kids to put in front of you as shields.
Yeah. You know, I don't remember that much about when he appeared at the Million Mom March, because by the time that happened, we were witnessing the destruction of the next Democrat president for the United States, Al Gore. It was an amazing thing to watch because a bunch of women corralled Bill Clinton on live television and caused the Million Mom March pretty much to evaporate in a puff of logic. It was, I think, one of the landmarks of the citizen media, which is anytime a citizen can communicate to the world. Now, this happened on ABC television, but you or I or anyone else with an internet connection can wreak equal havoc. And by shutting down Bill Clinton, by trapping him in the lie of concern, by showing that he didn't really give a darn about women or about their ability to defend themselves, caused the entire Million Mom March movement to collapse under its own weight. And it was after that, because Al Gore had already set his stakes on gun control as part of his year 2000 campaign, that he couldn't carry his own state of Tennessee, which is what caused him to lose the election.
I believe the lady's name was Susan Howard.
Susan Howard.
Yep. One of my favorite actresses from Dallas. She played, I think, Ray Krebs' wife in the TV series Dallas. And she was one of the I believe, one of the better people on that show. It was it was a very interesting give and take. I read about it in your book, and it's in I forget which chapter it is in exactly. I think it's in the Michael Moore chapter, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Yes. And so Michael Moore has, the fat boy, as we like to call him here in Michigan, has basically fallen off the radar, which is good.
Now, just a quick aside, how could Michigan spawn Michael Moore and Ted Nugent? I'm confused.
Yes, so they're at the different ends of the state, though. Ted's from the
That would
southern
explain
part,
a lot.
and the fat boy's from the northern part.
Oh, my.
That is an interesting observation. And we have managed to kill over an hour talking about various matters of importance as well as frivolities. Guy, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think this was highly informative for the audience. Your book, what is it? Gun Facts. That's available for free, correct?
Anyone can download the free version directly from gunfacts.info. If you're digitally impaired, hand a credit card to one of your grandchildren, have them go to Amazon.com, and they can order you up a printed version.
Okay. And your book is called Shooting the Bull, and it is about the lies of the gun control industry.
And a primer on how to spot political propaganda in real time.
Yes, folks, it has the actual list of lies that they use, and you can use this in virtually any situation that you find yourself in with these people. If you're able to identify the lie that they're using, you can combat it. And they're always lying about something. They're always lying about something.
Anytime they want your money or your freedom, they're going to lie to you.
Yes. Well, at any rate, I appreciate you coming on the show. We have reached the end of the episode. The MP3, ladies and gentlemen, will be available a little bit later this evening, and we will begin uploading this episode to YouTube, and it will begin repeating on the video stream almost immediately. So, Mr. Smith, I appreciate you coming on the show. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself as much as I did.
It was great, good fun, and thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on, and we will be in touch.
Glad to hear it. Take care, my friend.
Okay, bye. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Guy Smith. He is a Second Amendment scholar, I would put forth, because I have been reading his book, Shooting the Bull, and it is absolutely hysterical. You have to get a copy of this book. So, we are going to go ahead and start uploading this to YouTube. We are going to restart the video stream in just a minute, playing a repeat of the show, unless I have done something horribly wrong recording it. And we will get the MP3 up on the audio stream and loop that. I believe that our guest tonight, he gave us information. It was really good talking to somebody who is so far into the mainstream media apparatus as he is, to talk to us in common sense terms and in a very down-to-earth manner. So I certainly appreciate him coming on the show. And we will begin processing all of the files and everything. I appreciate everybody watching. And until next time, possibly even tomorrow night, we will see you once again on Surrounded by Idiots, starring me, Bill Zam. See you guys later. Thank you for stopping by.